Ho ho ho, Merry Christmas, or Hanukkah, or Kwanzaa, or whatever you choose to celebrate. This is my friend Jeremy, and we're doing a movie review on the 1974 Canadian horror classic Black Christmas, which we both have, I think, the same Blu-ray copy of.
Yeah, we do.
And yours is actually signed, it looks like.
Yeah, I got it signed by Keir. I sent it to him. He was nice enough to sign it.
Okay. Now, first of all, let me take this stupid Santa hat off. Now, Black Christmas was directed by Bob Clark, who did a few other horror films besides this, like Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, and Death Dream, and Baby Geniuses, of course, his scariest film. But he's probably best known for his comedies like Porky's and Turk 182, and of course, A Christmas Story, which might be the most famous Christmas movie ever made next to It's a Wonderful Life. Now, the film is loosely based on the urban legend of the babysitter and the man upstairs, which is the same urban legend that inspired the 1978 film When a Stranger Calls. Now, that story is said to be loosely based on the real-life unsolved murder of Janet Kreisman, I think is her last name. Now, of course, the movie has nothing to do with babysitters, but if you know of that urban legend, there is something in that story that's very similar to something that happens in this movie. So, what are your thoughts on Black Christmas?
Oh, I love this movie. I think it's very creepy and unsettling, and I think it's got a great cast.
Oh, yeah.
Olivia Hussey, Keir, John Saxon, Margot.
Yeah, Margot Kidder.
They're all just fantastic in this movie. Now,
I first saw this movie actually back in 2018. I knew about the movie for years because I remember first hearing about this film because of Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments, which actually introduced me to a lot of really cool movies when I was younger. But I actually first saw this movie at the Cinema Arts Center, which is a theater here on Long Island. It was a double feature of this and Gremlins, actually. What I really like about this movie is it has such a creepy tone to it, and also touches on a lot of really interesting themes that are still very much relevant today. But this is actually a really funny movie, too. There's a lot of humor in this film, but the humor doesn't feel out of place either.
Correct. It doesn't feel forced, and it kind of just flows very naturally with the story, as do the political undertones.
Now, what the plot of Black Christmas is we follow these girls at a sorority house, and they're getting these obscene phone calls by somebody who calls himself Billy. And as the movie goes on, these girls start getting picked off one by one, seemingly by this man, Billy. And throughout the film, we're not really sure of the true identity of Billy. And it's just such a creepy premise, too, because, spoiler, you never actually find out who Billy is.
Yeah, that's right. They keep him a mystery throughout the whole film, and they mostly show it from his point of view. You know, like in the beginning when he's climbing up to the window in the attic, when he's just kind of destroying everything in there.
And you get these, subtle hints to what his backstory could be by some of the things he's saying to himself in the phone calls. But even that, is that really his backstory? Or is this almost like a split personality thing going on with him? You don't really know what his deal is. Now, there is sort of a red herring in the film where you think the main character, Jess, you think her boyfriend might be the killer.
Yeah.
Because there's this whole subplot in the film about how, because she's pregnant and she wants an abortion, and he's deeply against this, and you start to think, maybe he could be the killer, but
he was the red herring. He even at one point calls and he's a crying mess saying, "Don't kill the baby, Jess. Don't kill the baby." And, the killer actually says something that he says, which is
just like having a wart removed.
That's right. Peter, I don't think he's a bad guy. He's
a dick, but you also kind of get it. Ultimately, I still think the choice was Jess's. Yeah. If she wanted to get the abortion, that was her right to do that. But at the same time, he's an asshole, but he's a realistic asshole. You can somewhat see where he's coming from, and that's what I like about the movie is the characters are very three-dimensional in this movie. Yeah. Even the characters that you're technically supposed to look at as assholes, you don't root for them, but you still at least can empathize with them a little bit.
Yeah, I think you could say the same thing about Barb.
Yeah, Barb. I actually really liked Barb, honestly.
Oh, yeah, she's great. She's just... I love how snide and sarcastic she is, and although she later does kind of cross the line at, the dinner with her, Miss Mac, and Mr. Harrison.
Yeah, Claire's father, who Claire is the first person we see killed in the movie, and she's missing throughout most of the film, and you see her father at the house looking for her. And I actually really felt bad for the father character.
Yeah, it's like she was being really unnecessarily rude.
Especially when she's like, I don't give a shit about Mr. Harrison!
And I'm like, he's sitting right there,
Margot Kidder steals this movie, I think.
Of course, you have Olivia Hussey as Jess, and she's just great.
Oh, yeah.
She's a beautiful leading lady.
Oh, yeah.
She's so sympathetic, and she's so sweet. You don't want anything bad to happen to her. I actually wrote to Olivia Hussey years ago, actually back in 2011. Oh, wow, that was over a decade ago. And she was nice enough to respond. She answered my questions, and I think one of her answers to my question about what was filming Black Christmas like was difficult because she said she was going through a divorce from her first husband, I think.
Okay.
At the time, but that working with Bob Clark was wonderful. I actually met her recently at Schiller Theater.
Okay.
And she was lovely to meet, just so nice. We had a nice little chat for the brief time I met her, and, I just can't say enough good things about her. She's wonderful.
Yeah, and John Saxon in this movie, we gotta talk about John Saxon.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the cops in the movie are kind of incompetent, but John Saxon's character... You can tell this guy really does give a shit about these girls and is trying to do the right thing. And I just really loved his character in this movie of Lieutenant Fuller.
Yeah, he's great. John Saxon was really good at playing tough cops.
Yeah.
In this and Nightmare on Elm Street, he did a great job playing a tough cop who's just trying to get the job done.
But he's good at playing a cop that's both badass but also compassionate, too.
I met John Saxon back in 2010 in Monster Mania.
He's somebody I wish I could have gotten a chance to meet. Unfortunately, he passed away, a year ago now? Or
2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a shame. He was a great actor, though, very recognizable. Unfortunately, I think he had, dementia or Alzheimer's or something in his later years.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
And you met the actor who played Peter in the movie, right?
Yeah, Keir. I've actually met him 3 times. I met him at the Cinema Arts Center way back, I think in 2010. And then I met him at Schiller Theater. And then I met him again at Schiller Theater in 2018, where I finally got a photo with him. And I actually got video of him too. We mostly talked about 2001: A Space Odyssey. That time I met him, I did get him to sign a photo of him as Peter in Black Christmas. Funny thing, when he signed it, he accidentally wrote Dave Bowman along with his signature, because that's the name of his character in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
That's interesting.
And so I had to go back and ask, can you please sign another with the actual character name, Peter? And he was nice, he did it. He's a very nice man. I can't say enough good things about him. And, I've written to him as well. That's how I got the Blu-ray insert signed. He answered my questions. And I asked him what working with Bob Clark was like, and he said it must have been okay, but I don't have any memories of the experience. And it's no wonder that he doesn't have any memories of the experience of making this movie, because as he himself said in the audio commentary on the Blu-ray, he was only on this movie for 3 days.
Okay.
Yeah, IMDb says he was on it for a week, but he says 3 days, so I'll go with what he says.
Yeah, but memories are malleable.
Yeah.
People remember things wrong all the time, so...
Either way, he wasn't on this movie very long, so...
Which is interesting, because he has such an important presence in the movie. You could argue that he's sort of the secondary antagonist of the film. Yeah, you also have, in terms of the cast... He has a very small role in the movie, but you have Leslie Carlson, who would go on to be in some of David Cronenberg's movies. He has a small role in this film as one of the detectives. He's actually the one who figures out that the calls are coming from inside the
He's
house.
the one who traces.
The traces the calls.
Okay.
Now, what do you think of Nick Mancuso? Is that his last name? Who plays the voice of Billy?
He does a great job.
Oh yeah, that's
really scary.
Oh yeah.
And I love the sound that you get when, not just the sounds he makes, but just the sound of the score. Like, it's hard to explain. Just such an ominous sound whenever he sort of appears on the screen, even though you really can't see him.
Yeah.
And also the shots of Claire's body and with the bag over her face and her mouth. And you can tell just how painful it must have been to endure that.
Yeah.
And the sound that plays when you see, him rocking her in the chair. Yeah. That's insanely creepy. Sound during Claire's death is quite shocking. It's just, like that. Even though it only lasts, the shot of her getting strangled with the bag only lasts for a few seconds, it's terrifying enough.
And it's also really creepy, the fact that we as the audience know that Claire's dead throughout the whole movie, but the characters within the movie don't know what the hell happened to Claire throughout the whole film, and there's just something very eerie about that, especially at the end where you realize they still haven't found Claire's body, nor have they found who the killer actually was.
Yeah, they also haven't found Miss Mack's body either.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, speaking of Miss Mack,
I liked her in this movie.
Like Barb, I'd say she was definitely the comic relief for the time she was alive.
Yeah.
She's clearly an alcoholic, and she's just a drunken mess throughout the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, Mr. Harrison is nice enough to give her a ride, and when he walks away, she flips him off. It's like, what?
Well, to be fair, I mean, Mr. Harrison, I sympathize with this guy because, he's worried about his daughter, but, he's very judgmental of, the sorority house. Like, when he's in, Claire's room, he's like, I don't approve of this atmosphere. I intend to do something about it. But also, I take that as, this is just a very conservative-minded guy who's probably of a different time, but he's a sympathetic character, but, I don't know, from the point of view of the house mother, I somewhat got why she flipped him off.
I love how she hides booze all over the house.
Yeah, that is great.
Even in the toilet, which was just disgusting.
Yeah.
It's like, that thing was just in not the actual part of the toilet, the bowl, but in that part. It was in the toilet. It's like, are you really going to put your mouth on that now?
Well, to be fair, the shit doesn't go in that part of the toilet. Yeah, I would have at least washed the cap off first before I took a swish of that. Now, the movie also has a lot of political undertones. There's definitely a feminist undercurrent to the film. The fact that Jess wants to get an abortion, and her boyfriend Peter's so against this. And Peter, well, you could somewhat empathize with him a little bit. He's also a real dick when he says, you can't make a choice like that, or you can't make a decision like that. Where it's like, yes, she can, asshole.
Yeah, no, well, he says, you can't make a decision like that. You haven't even asked me yet.
It's also important to keep in mind that this movie came out only a year after the Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade. And not to get too political, but considering what happened within the last year, makes this movie oddly even more relevant today. Also, the fact that the phone calls are of a disturbingly sexual nature, and the fact that the authorities, with the exception of John Saxon's character, really don't seem to take the women very seriously when they're reporting Claire missing, or when they're reporting these obscene phone calls. So there's definitely a feminist undercurrent to the film. And also the fact that, I mean, this is more subtle, but the fact that you have Mr. Harrison coming there sort of judging the atmosphere of the sorority. Meanwhile, he probably wouldn't say the same thing if he was seeing his son at a fraternity, you know what I mean?
Probably. There's also that cop played by an actor named Doug McGrath, who's just... He's kind of a douchebag. He's the one who, Barb tricks with that whole fellatio comment. Which is one of the funniest fucking scenes in the movie, especially when
John Saxon's character and the other cop are laughing their asses off at him. Like I said before, as dark as this movie is, there's some actual humor in this film, and you could really see how Bob Clark would eventually go on to comedies.
Yes.
Another really creepy aspect of the movie is, like, there's sort of this subplot where there's this high school girl that has gone missing. They later find her dead in the park. And what's creepy about that is maybe it was this person calling himself Billy who did that, but I also got the impression it could have been somebody else who murdered her too. Like, there's something very eerie about that, the ambiguity of it all. Like, was this all the work of just one person? Were there other killers involved? And you know what I mean?
You know, and of course the sounds the killer makes, you know, Agnes, it's me, Billy. You know, that's very disturbing. I also love towards the end when Jess finds her friends Barb and Phil, their dead bodies, and then she sees his eye looking at her.
Yes, that is creepy as shit.
That's a very scary shot. And then he's screaming at her when she slams the door into him. And it's just a horrible sound to hear.
Yeah. I also wanted to point out, I actually really liked, I think the character's name is Chris, Claire's boyfriend.
Yeah.
I actually really liked him, too.
Yeah, he was a great character.
And he had an epic fur coat.
Yeah.
His fucking fur coat in that movie was amazing. Now, there was a 1976 novelization of this movie. Have you ever read that?
No.
Or familiar with it at all?
I've never read it.
And this movie has also had a huge influence on the later slasher genre. Now, at the time this movie came out, the slasher genre really wasn't a thing yet. Like, a lot of people credit John Carpenter's Halloween as the first real slasher film, but this movie is absolutely a slasher film, and this predates Halloween by a good 4 years. And Halloween was clearly influenced by this movie. In fact, Bob Clark actually tells a story on the audio commentary, and I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently at some point he was going to direct a movie that was going to be written by John Carpenter, and this was before Halloween, and John Carpenter told him that he was a huge fan of Black Christmas, and asked him, do you think you would ever do a sequel to Black Christmas? And Bob Clark said, no, I'm not interested in doing a sequel, but he did say that if he did do a sequel, his idea for a sequel is it would follow Billy, who would later get captured by the police and sent to an institution, but then escape the following fall, and he would have called it Halloween. And this was before John Carpenter made Halloween. Again, I don't know if that's true or not, but that is the story that Bob Clark tells on the audio commentary. I guess if you think about it, Halloween's almost an unofficial sequel to Black Christmas.
It is very interesting, I must say.
Yeah, and of course you had When a Stranger Calls, which I mentioned before. You could tell this movie was probably an influence on that. I mean, they are technically based on the same story. Even Nightmare on Elm Street, even though that's a supernatural slasher film, there were some subtle things in that movie that you could tell somewhat owe a little to Black Christmas. The fact that John Saxon's in both movies, playing very similar characters, and even the fact that one of the victim's boyfriends ends up getting accused of the crimes. Like, again, there are some subtle similarities between the two movies. Now, recently there was a fan film called It's Me, Billy, which I think acts as a sequel to this. Now, since it's a fan film, whether you actually count it as an official canon sequel, I guess is up to you. Have you heard of that fan film?
No, I've never heard of it.
Now, there were actually two remakes of this movie, one in 2006 and the other in 2019. Now, before we talk about the 2006 remake, here is author Mark Allan Gunnells giving his thoughts on the original Black Christmas.
Hello, Mark Allan Gunnells here. My friend Christian has asked me to do a review of the movie Black Christmas, and I'm also going to do short reviews on the two remakes of that film. But I am going to start with the original, the 1974 Bob Clark film, Black Christmas. Happens to also be the year I was born, so great things happened that year, that's all I'm saying. But yeah, Black Christmas, is a great film, and in many ways a groundbreaking film that doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. It doesn't get as much credit as it deserves. The film has a simple premise. It's a bunch of girls at a sorority house on a college campus. It's getting near the Christmas holidays. A lot of people are leaving. The campus is kind of deserted. And the girls start getting these menacing and mysterious phone calls that are threatening, that are very unnerving, and no one really is taking them seriously. And one by one, the girls and their house mother start being killed off until the final girl, Jess, is left standing. A very simple premise, but done very well. It builds a lot of suspense. It's not one of those films that's just all about the violence and the blood and the gore. It actually takes the time to build character and to build suspense. And see, a lot of this was also used by John Carpenter 4 years later when he did 1978's Halloween. And that film is often credited for really kicking off the modern slasher genre. But a lot of the same things he did in that film were done in Black Christmas. In my opinion, Halloween sort of perfected them, did them a little more cleanly, but that isn't to degrade Black Christmas. It is a great film, and it really should get more credit for establishing a lot of those things. That gradual build of suspense, the detail to character, even the killer POV shot as the killer is stalking these girls. And the performances are really great. I particularly enjoy Olivia Hussey as final girl Jess and Margot Kidder as fellow sorority girl Barb. Perhaps my favorite performance is by Margot Kidder in this film. She infuses her character with so much wit and sarcasm and just sort of unhinged joy almost. Her character is so much fun to watch. But Olivia Hussey does a great job. She comes off as strong and capable and smart and tough. And there's a whole backstory with her character that has to do with an unplanned pregnancy and an abortion and conflicts that creates with her boyfriend, which, really add to the story because it makes her a more rounded character. There are more stakes in it. I mean, it also sets up for a potential motive of a potential killer, but it broadens the story so it's not just so narrow. There's also a great performance by John Saxon as a police officer, a detective in this film. Horror fans might know him most from the Nightmare on Elm Street films where he played Nancy's father. But I just think 1974's Black Christmas is a spectacular film that is really suspenseful. It has a great ending. I thought it took a lot of balls for them to end with still so much mystery left, because you leave the theater on edge because things you thought you knew turns out not to be the case. There's still this open-endedness to it that kind of haunts you after the film is over. So I highly recommend 1974's Black Christmas.
Here's our friend John giving his thoughts on the original Black Christmas.
Hello everyone, Christian asked me my thoughts and honest opinions are about the original Black Christmas from 1974. I already reviewed this movie on my YouTube channel 2 years ago. One thing I can agree with coming from someone who is a huge die-hard Halloween fan, I can agree that Halloween overshadowed this movie when it first came out. This movie was not a big hit when it first came out. It's a very underrated movie that has gained a big cult following over the years and has gotten more recognition throughout the years. While Halloween is still my favorite horror movie, I still love and have a lot of respect for this movie, and it's one of the best horror Christmas movies ever, and it's another one of my favorite horror movies. I love its dark, creepy atmosphere, and this movie shows how even a holiday like Christmas, which we all think is the most wonderful time of year, and yet even bad things can happen at Christmas time. I love the camera tricks of the killer's point of view, showing from his perspective on killing his victims, haunting them as a predator, stalking his prey. In a way, this camera trick was popular, was used for Friday the 13th when you think about it. It amazed and shocked when I found out that Bob Clark, who directed this movie, directed A Christmas Story. Bob Clark said he based the movie, got the idea from real-life murders of Canadian serial killer Wayne Bowden, who killed 4 women around Christmas time in the early 1970s. He was known as the vampire rapist. Bob Clark also said he based the killer and was inspired from serial killer Edmond Kemper. There are themes on feminism done very well in this movie. I love the character Jess, played by Olivia Hussey. She's an example of showing how hard it is for a woman to make a tough decision on whether or not does she want to have a baby or does she want to have it aborted. It's not that she's against having kids. Without explanation, you get the hint and sense that maybe she's afraid to be a mother for specific reasons. Maybe she has an estranged relationship with her mom, or maybe she had a bad upbringing and she's scared to be like her mother. Another theory that came to mind while watching this movie, maybe her father was too dominant when she was little growing up. Becoming a parent can be a hard decision. Jess is one of my favorite final girls. Her boyfriend, played by Keir from 2001: A Space Odyssey. When I first saw this, I did not recognize him. Just like Jess's character also has a dilemma. He wants to be a pianist, but has a dilemma just like Jess. Does he give up his dream of becoming a famous pianist, become a father, and consider another career path to start and raise a family? Margot, who you all know played Lois Lane in the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. Damn, she really curses like a truck driver in this movie. Despite that she's a bit of a bitch, she's kind of funny when they are at the police station reporting a missing person. She tells the cop the address is Fellatio. You can also say that her character is maybe like she's misunderstood, that she's a depressed alcoholic who has problems. May she rest in peace. I miss Margot Kidder. She will always be my Lois Lane. Seeing Andrea and Martin in this movie was interesting because I grew up watching her on SCTV. My mother and my older sisters love My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Another comedian doing a serious role done very well. John Saxon is great in this movie, but his character is a little bit minor compared to his character in A Nightmare on Elm Street. But still, he does a great job in this movie. He's always fun to match no matter what movie he does. Not knowing the killer's background, why he goes around killing people, really makes it scary. The phone call scene is crazy where he shouts all the insult of fraternity girls. I won't spoil the ending. It's one of the best horror movie endings I've ever seen in a horror movie. But I will say, at first I did not like it, but it's grown on me as I've gotten older. It gets better for me on more viewings. To wrap things up, here's a personal story. This past October, I met Olivia Hussey. She was very nice, sweet, and friendly. I told her how I love her character in the movie, and we both agreed the remakes suck and insulted the original. She told me lots of college professors like her because of Romeo and Juliet. I once watched her in an interview where she said that Steve Martin worked with her on the movie Roxanne, and he told her, "Oh, you're one of my favorite movies." And at first she thought, "Oh, Romeo and Juliet," but Steve Martin replied, "No, Black Christmas." And believe it or not, it's been said that Elvis Presley loved this movie, and he saw this movie like 20-something times in the movie theaters when it came out. The Presley family watched this movie every Christmas in honor and memory of him. I will say, the king of rock and roll had good taste in movies. That was my review of Black Christmas. Hope you like hearing my thoughts, and thank you, Christian, for having me on board for the original Black Christmas.
So in 2006, we had the first remake of Black Christmas. What did you think of this one?
I don't know, I can take it or leave it. It's okay, I guess.
Yeah, I'm about the same, honestly. I found it to be... I didn't hate it, but I also found it to be very mediocre. It definitely lacks the subtlety and the actual, like, psychological dread of the original film. Yeah. This is just a non-stop gore fest, which I don't mind that, don't get me wrong, I don't mind that at all, but it's a very different kind of horror film than the original one was, and I don't think it's as good, honestly.
It isn't.
Also, the characters, in the original one, the characters felt real, and you actually gave a shit about the characters, and even the characters who weren't very likable were still empathetic to some degree. Whereas here, yeah, the characters are complete douchebags and stereotypes, and there were two characters in this one that I thought were alright. The house mother and the older sister of Claire. But yeah, those were the only two characters I really liked. Maybe Katie Cassidy's character to an extent, but What do you think of the characters in this one?
Yeah, they're pretty forgettable, to be honest with you. Not as memorable as they were in the original. And fun fact, though, Mrs. Mack in this one is played by Andrea Martin, who played Phil in the original.
Okay, alright. Yeah, and also in this you actually find out Billy's backstory, whereas in the original one, you had no idea who Billy even was. In this, they tell you everything about Billy, and it's actually pretty fucked up, to be honest.
It really is. Spoiler alert, his mother rapes him.
Yeah. And then his mother has a child from the rape. That child, who's basically both his sister and his daughter, spoiler, ends up being the secondary antagonist of the film, which, from the beginning, you know there's two killers. Yeah, I kind of guessed that it was going to end up being the sister who was the second killer. Yeah, it's not very good. There's really not much to say about this one. It's kind of a bland, mediocre, mid-2000s horror film.
I thought Katie Cassidy was alright in it. She, of course, would later go on to be in the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. But, yeah, it's pretty forgettable. You also have Michelle Trachtenberg and Mary Elizabeth Winstead.
And I like her. I mean, the character she plays is pretty forgettable, but I actually do like her as an actress.
Yeah, and I met her, too. She's nice. What do you think of the boyfriend of Katie Cassidy's character?
Oh, he was a complete douchebag.
Yeah.
He was Peter was a douchebag in the original film, but Peter still felt believable. Whereas, not that this guy isn't believable, there certainly are scumbags like him in real life, but at least with Peter, there were moments where you could empathize with him, whereas this guy is just...
Yeah, he was basically recording his sexual encounters with different women and, I guess, putting them online.
Yeah.
You know, Katie Cassidy's character was like, oh, was I next or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, not a very likable character.
Although I did like the part where, I don't know if you were paying attention at this part, that, Mrs. Mack and Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character are both going to the car to try to escape, and,
yeah.
she gives her the brush, Mrs. Mack gives her the brush, expecting her to do her part and wipe off the snow from the front of the car.
And she says, "What is this?" That was funny.
She's like, seriously?
Yeah.
And then she gets out and says, privileged bitch, southern princess.
Anything else to say about this one?
I mean, Billy and Agnes are pretty creepy, I would say.
Okay.
I liked how they gave him yellow skin, which made him look even scarier.
You see, I actually thought the yellow skin was kind of cheesy looking.
Oh yeah, I also liked the idea of him making Christmas cookies out of his mother's flesh.
Yeah, I gotta try to look up the recipe for that, because I really want to try that. Why are you laughing? I'm being freaking serious. Yeah, there's really not much else I have to say about this one.
Yeah, I got nothing.
Here is Mark again giving his thoughts on the 2006 remake.
Now, the first time they tried to remake Black Christmas was in 2006. I only saw this film once, and I can't speak on it a lot because I don't remember a lot, because I found it very bland and very forgettable. It was very standard of horror films of that time, very slick production, a lot of gorgeous people dressed to the nines, and it was very formula to me. And, there were a lot of good actresses in it, actresses that I enjoy. And Andrea Martin, who was one of the sorority girls in the original film, came back to be the house mother in this remake. But those actresses were not given anything really meaty to do. It just felt very standard, very by the book. There was nothing particularly exciting about it. There was nothing particularly memorable about it. So 2006 Black Christmas is a big thumbs down for me. I wasn't a fan.
Here's John again giving his thoughts on Black Christmas 2006.
Here are my thoughts on the Black Christmas remake from 2006. Before I dive into that, here's a little background story. In 2006, I was 13 years old at the time when this remake came out. At that time, I had no idea there was an original Black Christmas despite the internet being around. Didn't think twice at that time to Google stuff like I do now with movies. Before seeing or knowing about the original Black Christmas, at that time I did not know this was a remake. I thought this was an original horror movie. Little did I know. I didn't see this in the movie theaters when it came out. I was too young, and I remember seeing the trailers saying this looks scary and I did not want to watch it. Fast forward a few years later, when I got to college, I watched the original Black Christmas and was very thankful to have seen that first before this piece of shit garbage. In the summer 2017, during the eclipse, I stayed inside and wasn't going outside to look at the eclipse despite they had sunglasses. I was still not taking a chance and falling for those, and looking back, I wish I had gone outside and wish I went blind watching this movie. Rewatching it for this retrospective review, my opinions have not changed. This film has not gotten any better for me. I really hate this movie. This movie was a complete mess. It's one of the worst horror movie remakes. It's an insult to the original, and it forgets the whole point concept. It was way over the top with the gore, too gross and disgusting. Seeing Billy eat eyeballs was like way too much and lazy. I couldn't eat one cookie that Christmas in 2017. It was so gross and disgusting when we see Billy kill his mom, skin her, and eat her like cookies. Yuck. I almost threw up after watching that scene. I am not joking. I feel like they were going for making a poor man's version of Psycho with the incest with Billy and his mother. It was fucked up with Billy's mother raping Billy so she could have another child. The characters sucked, bland, and not memorable. We all know he's gonna live and survive. When the characters die, we really don't care at that point. The only actor from the original comeback was Andrea Martin. This surprises me. I guess she needed the paycheck desperately. I guess they did not pay her enough for My Big Fat Greek Wedding or SCTV residuals. I once read this was supposedly going to be a sequel to the first movie, but it never came to materialize. Instead, they went the remake route. Also, after the death of Bob Clark in 2007 is another reason why they did not make the sequel. I wish they made a sequel to the original instead of this piece of shit garbage.
So in 2019, there was another remake of Black Christmas. This one is almost more of a loose remake. It has some subtle similarities to the original, but in a lot of ways, it's almost a remake in name only. At the same time, though, it does have a lot of the same feminist messages as the original film. Arguably, though, it's a little more on the nose this time. Now, I personally did not really care for the 2019 Black Christmas movie. Not because of the messages. I actually agreed with a lot of the social messages of the film. I just didn't think it was a very well-made or well-written film at all. But Jeremy here absolutely loved the 2019 one. This was actually his favorite film of 2019. So why did you love this one so much?
Oh, I love getting a freaking political message constantly shoved in my face an entire time I'm watching the movie. I just love that. Just love the shit out of it. I just love how almost every character is an unlikable asshole, both male and female, I might add. I love how they just hacked this movie up in the editing room in a shameless attempt to get a PG-13 rating, and believe me, it shows. Yeah, I hate this movie. Okay, enough with the sarcasm. I do not like this movie at all.
I did not hate this one as much as he did, and as much as a lot of other people did, because a lot of people really got angry with this movie, and this movie didn't make me mad. I just didn't think it was that good of a movie, but it didn't piss me off. A lot of people felt that the feminism in the film bordered on misandry, and I personally didn't see that. To paraphrase our late friend Chris, who actually liked this movie, simply pointing out that rape on college campuses exists and that toxic masculinity exists does not automatically make this film misandrous.
Well, no, I don't think that doing that is misandry either, but this does more than that. I mean, you've got that scene where, they're arguing in the kitchen and Chris just blankets all men saying, oh, men have all the power, and what's his name? The boyfriend of one of the sorority girls says, not all men have power, and she just goes, did you just not all men me? And I'm like, yeah, he did, because not all men have power.
Yeah, but to be fair, in that scene, he's talking about that little dance the girls did, where they were singing that song to the frat boys, basically calling them out for what they did to Riley. Like, he's saying, you girls went up there and basically painted old men as rapists. Actually, I didn't see that at all. At no point in that song were they saying old men were like that. They were just pointing out those frat boys, and the movie's pointing out the toxicity of frat boy culture and rape on college campuses, which is a real thing, so, I didn't see it as misandrous. I do think it was very heavy-handed, and I certainly didn't think the message was very well written in the film. My biggest issue with the movie is a lot of the social commentary in the film, and a lot of the dialogue in general feels like just Twitter conversations rather than actual dialogue.
Yeah, someone once described this movie as a 2-hour-long Twitter argument. Although, believe it or not, I was actually excited for this movie in the months leading up to its release because I'm such a big fan of the original. When I found out Imogen Poots and Carrie L. West were in it, I'm a fan of those two. I was excited, and then I started hearing things like, oh, we're making it PG-13. That's when I first knew the movie was in trouble. Yeah, that was just a huge mistake in my eyes, making it PG-13. And then, of course, I started to hear things like, oh, it's terrible. A friend of mine told me all men are scum is basically the movie's message.
And I didn't necessarily get that. I think it's calling out toxic masculinity, but I didn't personally think it was saying that about all men, at least not in my opinion. Again, I could see how it could come off that way, because the movie was very poorly written, in my opinion, but I don't think it was intentional. I don't think there was any intentional misandry on the filmmaker's parts.
And as I said, maybe it wasn't intentional, but in some scenes, that's definitely the way it comes across. I mean, you literally have Carrie L. West's character. We might as well just get into spoilers here.
In the movie, it's not just one killer. It turns out that the frat boys in the movie, like, their fraternity is essentially a cult, and they end up getting possessed by the founder of the college.
Oh, well, more specifically, his evil, toxic masculinity black goo that leaks from his statue. Yeah, that's another thing. I just found replacing Billy with that was so ridiculously stupid. I mean, you go from having this really menacing killer who you don't quite see, but he's there, you feel his presence, and he's terrifying, to some stupid black goo out of a stupid statue.
What do you want from me? I mean, I didn't write the fucking movie. Again, I think it's a stupid movie, but I'll defend it against being called misandrous. Personally.
Fair enough. I mean, you do, though, have that line where, Riley says to Carrie L. West, you're all insane, and he just says, oh, no, not insane, Miss Stone.
Simply men.
Yeah.
But I took that as more, that's how he sees his own gender. Like, he, because he's somebody who thinks that it's a man's role to be above women, and and there are a lot of people who actually think that way, so I just saw his character as being sort of satirical of people like that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe I was too harsh with this movie after I first saw it a couple years ago, but at the same time, I still think it's terrible. I mean, first of all, you've got dialogue like this. That's the founder drawing out your inner alpha. You have almost... Riley is a sympathetic character, mainly because of what happened to her. Everyone else was either an asshole or just plain forgettable.
Yeah.
Yeah, these characters are nowhere near as good as the ones in the original.
No, I agree. Riley's a good character, though. I actually thought she was actually the only likable character in the movie, if we're...
Quite possibly.
Yeah,
yes.
but, I agree. I don't think it's a good movie. I'm not as angry about it as you got when it first came out, and now it seems like you're at least a little more fair on the movie, at least.
I still don't like the movie at all, but I've somewhat softened my views against it. I'm still against it, but perhaps not as harsh as when I first saw it. Yeah, when I first saw it, I had these very knee-jerk reactions to it. I made making angry posts about this movie almost like my second job. I was so pissed off. I've gotten into some somewhat heated discussions with people about this movie. I tried to be civil in my arguments. I mean, maybe, alright, I once called the director a misandrist in a Facebook post. Not in the post itself, but I commented something like, oh, she must be a misandrist or something, and a friend of mine said, you really shouldn't do that, you don't know her, blah, 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 and I agreed with him, yeah, you're right, so I took it back. But that was a long time ago now. Now I don't know, I'm a little more calm.
Alright.
But, yeah, I still think this is a terrible movie, and not even just whether it was misandrist or not. I mean, first of all, another thing I hate is that it's really a remake mostly in name only. You know, I do think that when you remake a movie, you should do some things differently, but not so differently that it might as well be called something else.
Like I said, it's more of... I think it's true to the original in terms of those feminist themes, but the feminist themes were a lot more subtle in the original, whereas here they're definitely, more in your face and on the nose. But our friend Mark Allan Gunnells did make a good point that maybe the reason they're a little more on the nose is the fact that it's a movie made by women, and these are people who are more directly affected by those issues. Which I can get that, but at the same time, my counter argument to that would be there are a lot of other feminist movies done by women that I think are a lot more subtle in their message. But then again, lack of subtlety doesn't always mean bad. I mean, my favorite movie of all time is the original Godzilla, and that movie's pretty on the nose with what it's trying to say politically, so it's not even lack of subtlety. I just didn't think this was a well-written movie, and that's my personal issue with the film.
I mean, I'm not unreasonable, and my friend did point out, you don't know her just based on the movie. I agree with that, At the same time, though, I've just about had enough of hearing defenses of this movie. Oh, God, Lord, I've heard it all.
Okay.
But, I mean, another thing about this movie is a lot of the writing did kind of feel lazy to me. For example, towards the beginning when Riley, before they get on stage to do the dance number, Riley goes to find the friend who's supposed to do it, and she happens upon this room where you see the cult kind of doing their initiation or whatever, and I'm like, why would you have that happen right as where other people could see it? It's you don't want to give yourself away that fast. So I thought the writing here and there was a little lazy. But surprisingly, watching it for the second time, it didn't piss me off as much as the first time. I do think the movie is very arrogant in a lot of ways, with the constant, forceful messaging. Also, I must point out, a criticism I told you earlier was the character Chris is just so unlikable.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. The fact that she pressures Riley into getting up on the stage to do that dance number, and especially in front of Riley's rapist, when it's clear Riley wasn't necessarily ready to do that, and it wasn't her place to tell her to go up on the stage. Yes, I agree. The character of Chris does come off as kind of an entitled brat. Like I said, the movie's awful, the movie's a mess, but I can't devote that much energy to the movie to get that angry about it,
Oh yeah, I've softened up. Well, I shouldn't say that. I've gotten a lot calmer about the movie. Another thing that people do complain about a lot with this movie is, again, that they made it PG-13, and the kills, almost all of them, they're like nothing. They get cut away from. Yes, in the original with Claire's death, that only lasted a few seconds, but they mattered. You felt her struggling, and you felt how painful it was. Here, it's just, the cult member comes up behind that one girl, grabs her with around the neck with something, and then it cuts away right before anything happens. I mean, that's pretty bad.
It's not good, but the movie's whatever to me.
Look, if you liked this movie, then that's great. By all means, keep liking it and keep enjoying it. I didn't like it. In fact, I think it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But don't let me stop you from enjoying it.
I still do enjoy watching, say, the Nostalgia Critic and Cinema Snob's review of it. Yeah. If you think I was being harsh against this movie, you should watch their review. Yeah, they were not kind to this movie at all. Neither was Chris Stuckman.
Now, if you're going to watch Black Christmas, watch the real one, the 1974 one.
Yeah, go watch the original instead. Trust me, you'll save yourself a lot of headaches.
And here is Mark Allan Gunnells giving his thoughts on the 2019 version of Black Christmas.
Now, the most recent remake of Black Christmas was in 2019. And this is an interesting one for me, and I might have a little bit more to say about this one because it is a much maligned film, but I personally really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed it for many of the reasons that most people don't seem to enjoy it. It has this reputation for being man-bashing, which I do not think is the case. It isn't man-bashing, it is a commentary on male toxicity and the effect that has on women. That's a very real thing. That movie, the 2019 Black Christmas, it isn't talking about all men, it's talking about a very specific kind of man that exists and what men like that do to women and how it makes them feel, how it affects their lives. I thought that was brilliant. I thought it was brilliantly done. I thought the actresses were great. I thought Carrie Elwes gave a great performance, a very menacing performance here. And here's the thing, why I think so many people think it's man-bashing. It's because it was made by a woman, and she was trying to take the things that she's experienced in her life when she's run up against male toxicity and put that into a film. That's what happens when you get marginalized people, women, people of color, LGBT folks, actually telling stories. What a lot of people think diversity in horror means is just your standard horror film, but with more people of color in it, or more gay characters in it. But no, what that really means is that people of color, women, queer people, we will be telling the stories. And when we tell those stories, they are going to reflect our lives. And they're not always going to be subtle, and it's not always going to couch everything in metaphor. But sometimes we're going to want to put what we face as marginalized people front and center. And that's going to make some people uncomfortable. And that's okay. Horror should make people uncomfortable. So the 2019 Black Christmas, I think that's a lot of what happened. People were very uncomfortable with how in-your-face Sofia Tackle was being as the writer and director of this film. Because, honestly, it is an uncomfortable subject. But I think it's an important subject. And like I said, when you get marginalized people finally telling their stories, they're going to put that out there. So to me, this is a great example. It's sort of like the remake or the reboot of Candyman that came out recently. And a lot of people said it was too focused on the racial stuff. But, that's people's lives. People have told me as a queer writer, sometimes I'm too focused on, the queer aspect, or, I'm putting too much homophobia in it. But here's the thing, I face homophobia every day. That's going to be reflected in my stories. Women face sexism. A lot of them every day. So they're going to put that in their stories. So I went on a little bit about the 2019 Black Christmas, but I think it's a great example of a marginalized storyteller reinventing the story in a way that is relevant to today. And there you go. That's my review of the original Black Christmas and the two remakes.
And here are John's thoughts on the 2019 version of Black Christmas.
I took a shit after watching this movie. My turd looked better than this movie. When they announced another remake to the Black Christmas, I said to myself, are you kidding me again? One remake wasn't enough. We needed a second remake. Did they not watch the '06 remake and learn their lesson to leave it alone? As Al Pacino said in Godfather 3, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. Then again, this movie makes Godfather 3 look better. It was made by Blumhouse around this time. They were so big and on a red hot streak at the time with the Purge movies, Get Out, Happy Death Day, and reinventing the Halloween franchise. I didn't see this when it came out, wasn't interested and didn't bother. I remember hearing about this movie had a fast production. That to me was a sign this movie's gonna tank. Like a lot of modern day movie trailers, it gave everything away, and before seeing the movie, it's not rocket science who the killer is. You don't have to play the whodunit game. The twists and turns are terrible, they don't make any sense. Whenever I saw a movie post of the 2019 Black Christmas remake on social media, I commented on how I refused to watch this movie unless I did a movie review collaboration with my friends on their YouTube channels. Well, it finally happened. Since Christian told me he wanted to talk about all 3 Black Christmas movies, I figured what the heck, finally watched it for the first time, and boy, I was really disappointed and insulted. And this movie made me feel dumb and numb. Just like the '06 remake, these characters are stupid, lame, no personality. We all know where he's gonna live and die. It tries way too hard, too political, over the top, and this movie was a response to the Me Too movie at the time when this movie came out, with Harvey Weinstein and other Hollywood scandals at that time. The guys who wrote Dumb and Dumber could have written this movie as an Oscar winner compared to the writers of these movies. These writers were a bunch of dumbbells. This is also the kind of movie that bored me to death, that wasn't paying any attention or giving a crap about the plot or characters, that I was looking at my phone, which I rarely do when I watch a movie. That's a bad habit and don't recommend that. Heck, if I was on an airplane trapped and watched this movie without cell phone service, I'd be reading the vomit bag. This movie relies too much on jump scares, making it stupid cheap, doesn't even try. That just shows how lazy this movie is. The dialogue is so boring, I'm not engaged in these characters like I am in the original Black Christmas. This movie is very rushed. I have a hard time keeping up with what the movie's trying to get at. Again, I found this movie being an insult misses the whole point and concept of what the original was all about. It's another wasted remade sequel that did not need to be made. And again, this was only made for money, no art or value to it. Even I felt insulted watching this movie. If genius existed, my wish is I wish both Black Christmas remakes did not exist. Whenever I review movies, I rarely grade or rate movies, but for once, I give this movie nothing, 0. This is also a movie I have no interest to ever rewatch again or never review on my YouTube channel. This is it right here. That was my review of the 2019 Black Christmas remake. Hope you liked it. And I am signing off once again. Christian, thank you for having me be a part of all 3 Black Christmas remakes.
So yeah, that was our review of the original Black Christmas, as well as our rather rambling reviews of the 2 remakes. Merry Christmas, I hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah, happy holidays.